Amidst the family celebration, my husband was sleeping with his mistress in the room next door. I led all our relatives to witness the scene. The instant the door was thrown open, my husband fell apart. In the noisy chaos of the family anniversary dinner, a heavy, cloying atmosphere hung in the air. The clatter of dishes, the calls for toasts among relatives, the shrieking and running of children, it all tangled together like a sticky web. I was seated at the head of the table, my fingertips idly tracing the cool rim of my wine glass. A proper smile adorned my face, but my gaze kept drifting to the half-empty seat beside me. My husband of 8 years, Frank Thompson, had vanished more than 30 minutes ago, using the excuse of an important work call. "Valerie, where's Frank?" "The lobster thermidor I special ordered for him is getting cold." My Aunt Carol's sharp voice cut through the noise. There was a subtle note of inquiry in her tone. I lifted my glass and took a sip. The chilled liquid failed to melt the ice spreading through my chest. Something urgent must have come up at the company. He must still be on the phone. "Please, eat. Don't wait for him." I felt a greasy, oppressive sensation, as if my stomach were stuffed with oil-soaked cotton. I set down my glass, the smile on my lips feeling stiff. "I'll go check on him. I wouldn't want him to have had too much to drink and passed out somewhere." I rose from my seat, seeking an escape from the suffocating heat. I walked down the carpeted hallway in my high heels, making almost no sound. As I neared the lounge area, the noise from the ballroom faded, and another kind of sound began to filter through. Intermittent, as if suppressed, female moans, and a man's ragged breathing. My steps halted before the door of the private lounge. The door at the end of the hall was closed, but the soundproofing wasn't perfect. Those sounds drilled into my eardrums like sharp needles. "Frank, not so loud. Your wife's whole family is out there." A syrupy voice, practically dripping with flirtation. And that voice, trying to sound cautious, belonged to Paula, my cousin, a recent college graduate who had come to me for support, who never missed a chance to say how her cousin and brother-in-law were the best in the world. I felt my heart being squeezed by a cold hand. Immediately after, I heard Frank Thompson's laughing voice, a voice so familiar, yet terrifyingly alien. "Let them wait. What I love most is seeing you nervous about us getting caught. It's so much more exciting, don't you think?" My head buzzed, and something inside me shattered completely. Blood rushed to my head, and in the next instant drained away entirely, leaving only a bone-deep, icy chill. I didn't move. I didn't make the slightest sound. My gaze slowly lowered to the narrow gap between the door and the floor. It seemed they hadn't turned on the main light, only a wall sconce. A dim yellow light seeped through the crack, enough to see 2 pairs of entangled feet. The man's polished dress shoes lay next to the woman's discarded high heels. The man's suit trousers were pooled around his ankles, and the woman's slender ankles were locked around his waist. Her toes, painted with a bright red pedicure, were tensed. I raised my gaze. What I could see through the crack was limited, but it was enough. Frank Thompson was pinning Paula Jennings against the doorframe. Paula's young body was almost completely hidden by his. He was exploring her neck, one hand gripping her waist tightly, the other hastily tearing at the collar of her shirt. Paula let out a moan that seemed both pained and ecstatic, throwing her head back. Just then, the light from the wall sconce caught something dazzlingly bright around her neck. It was a platinum necklace. The pendant was a perfectly cut diamond, surrounded by tiny pink diamonds, forming the shape of a lotus flower. The very one Frank Thompson had placed around my neck last month for my birthday. He had told me, "Valerie, you're like a lotus flower, you bloom in the mud without getting dirty. Thank you for everything you've endured." I had taken it off last night before my shower and left it on the dresser. This morning, I noticed it was gone. Frank Thompson tied his tie and said casually, "You probably don't remember where you put it, or maybe it fell into the wrong drawer. I'll help you look for it later." And this is how I had found it, hanging around the neck of his young mistress. At our family gathering, right under my nose, the oily cotton in my stomach instantly became a red-hot coal. My insides twisted as if they were burning. A metallic sweetness rose in my throat, but I forced it down. The hand I held on the doorknob was so tight my knuckles were white and trembling slightly. With just a small turn, the door would open. And then what? Expose everything? confront them, see their shame and their nakedness? No, that would be too simple. A violent fury fought to explode in my chest, but in the end, it didn't erupt. Instead, it cooled at an astonishing speed, solidified, and sank heavily into the depths of my heart. It became an unbreakable block of ice. Slowly, very slowly, I released the doorknob. With my fingertips, I lightly brushed the smooth panel, even pretending to wipe away non-existent dust. The nauseating sounds from inside continued, along with Frank Thompson's quiet promise. "Don't worry, honey. That old hag, ha. When she finds out the company is going under, she'll come crawling to me, then I can do whatever I want. The company is going under. She'll come crawling to me." A cold, faint smile spread silently across my mouth. So that was it. I took one last look through the crack in the door. The writhing, heaving shadows inside were ugly and deformed, and I turned around. My steps were as silent as when I came, but with a completely different rhythm. I went back the way I had come. The light in the hallway changed from dark to bright, and the noise from the event hall enveloped me again. The relatives were still talking loudly and clinking glasses. Their faces overflowed with false or perhaps genuine happiness. No one noticed the vile act of betrayal I had just witnessed. No one knew that heaven and earth had been inverted inside my mind. I walked directly to the small control lectern beside the main stage. There was a wireless microphone there. My cousin, the sound guy, was dozing. I approached and tapped him gently on the shoulder. He startled, looked at me, and put on a bewildered expression. "Valerie? I'm going to use the microphone for a moment. I have something to say." My voice was surprisingly calm. My cousin mumbled, "Okay," and handed me the microphone. I took the microphone and flicked the switch on. The faint electric hum amplified through the speakers, causing guests at a few tables near the stage to look at me reflexively. I took a deep breath and put that gentle, dignified smile back on my face. I spoke into the microphone with a clear voice, not high, not low, but just loud enough to cut through the noise of the room and reach everyone's ears. "Esteemed elders and dear relatives, could I have your attention for a moment? I have something to tell you." The noise in the event hall gradually subsided. All eyes, with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity, focused on me. I smiled and slowly scanned the room. My mother's worried gaze, my father's uncomprehending expression, and the irrepressible excitement on the faces of distant relatives, always eager for gossip. Good. Everyone is here. My smile deepened a bit. With a strange, almost cruel serenity, I declared, word by word, with clarity, "I have some great news to share with you all. Right now, in the lounge over there, my husband Frank and my cousin Paula are preparing a very special show for all of you. It's a truly wonderful performance, and everyone will enjoy a good show. It will have been worth coming all this way for." As soon as I finished speaking, the hall fell into absolute silence. Everyone froze, looking at each other. It seemed they hadn't immediately grasped the meaning of my words. Special show. Frank Thompson and Paula Jennings. I didn't give them time to react. I continued in a tone that seemed to magically guide people. "Let's all go and see it right now. It's the lounge at the back. Hurry. You might miss it if you're late." As my words fell, the entire hall erupted as if a drop of water had fallen into a cauldron of boiling oil. "What's going on? What special show? Frank and Paula? What does Valerie mean?" Suspicion, speculation, and a tacit, malicious guess spread rapidly among the people. Several young, curious cousins were the first to stand up. Their faces were filled with the excitement of not wanting to miss the show. Some adults frowned, but dragged along by the strange atmosphere, they stood up involuntarily and followed the crowd. "Let's go see what this mess is all about." People surged like a tide towards the hallway leading to the lounge area. The noise of footsteps, murmurs, and scraping chairs mixed into a chaotic din. I stood there, still holding the microphone. I watched the flow of that immense crowd. My mother approached to try and stop me, but I gently sidestepped her. I shook my head at her and gave her a reassuring look. Then I put down the microphone and followed the crowd unhurriedly from behind. The hallway wasn't very wide. More than 50 relatives crowded forward. It was like an unstoppable flood. The murmuring amplified, echoing in the narrow space. The door is closed. Can you hear anything inside? As they neared the lounge, the suppressed, indescribable sounds seemed to become clearer. Several young men at the front exchanged glances. Sebastian, the most impulsive one, reached out and turned the doorknob. "It's locked," he shouted back. The people behind grew even more agitated. "Move! Let me!" Another cousin stepped forward. He was a gym teacher and strong. He took half a step back and kicked the door fiercely. Crash! With a tremendous noise, the flimsy lock broke. The door slammed against the back wall, making an even louder noise. The stalled crowd surged through the doorway like a floodgate opening. The instant the door was kicked in, the ambiguous sound from inside transformed into two short, sharp screams. Time seemed to stop at that moment. Inside the lounge, on the sofa, two white bodies were entangled in the most obscene posture, suddenly exposed to dozens of pairs of eyes. Frank Thompson lifted his head in horror. The flush of lust still on his face transformed into extreme pallor and terror before fading. He instinctively tried to grab something to cover himself, but his desperation was pathetic. Paula Jennings, lying beneath him, her young, flirtatious face was even more twisted. After the brief scream, she sank desperately into the corner of the sofa, like an ostrich, trying to cover herself with the scattered clothes, but only succeeding in exposing more traces of the ugliness. The diamond lotus flower necklace around her neck bounced on her sweaty skin in the confusion, reflecting the light dazzlingly. It seemed the most scathing mockery. Outside the door, a deathly silence reigned. All the relatives, men and women, young and old, had their eyes wide and mouths agape, frozen as if they had been collectively bewitched. The expressions on their faces were varied: shock at the unbelievable, embarrassment at the unexpected situation, undisguised contempt, and the excitement of gloating over another's misfortune. Some adults turned red with anger and trembled from head to toe. The air solidified. Only the ragged breathing and the desperate, irrepressible sobs of Paula Jennings filtered out from within. At this crossroads of extreme silence and extreme chaos, I, Valerie Carter, stood at the back of the crowd. I didn't take another step forward. My gaze cut through the heads of the people in front and locked precisely on the face of that man, the one who had once slept in the same bed for 8 years, but was now as alien as a stranger. He seemed to regain a sliver of sanity under this devastating blow. His empty, terrified eyes unconsciously scanned the faces of the spectators gathered at the door, and as if drawn by something, he fiercely raised his head and met my gaze directly. With the desolation and coldness of the entire universe between us, he saw me. He saw the smile on my face, so clear, without any warmth, even with a faint hint of appreciation. In that instant, Frank Thompson's pupils contracted sharply to a pinpoint shock, bewilderment, followed by a sky-piercing rage and a bone-chilling cold as if falling into an abyss. Finally, all those emotions twisted into an extreme collapse. "Valerie!" He let out a bestial howl that didn't sound human. He scrambled up from the sofa, forgetting even to cover himself, intending to lunge at me. His eyes looked like they wanted to tear me to pieces. But he forgot something. His pants were still pathetically hanging around his ankles. The lunge sent him sprawling to the floor with a dull thud. The sound of his fall seemed to break the spell of deathly silence outside the door. Someone in the crowd couldn't hold back a choked laugh. Though they immediately covered their mouth, it was like lighting a fuse. The murmuring spread quickly like an epidemic, growing louder and louder, mixed with pointing fingers and contemptuous curses. My God, how shameless, to do this at a family gathering. And with his wife's cousin. Poor Valerie. Frank Thompson is not even human. Look at that Paula, always pretending to be so innocent. Ugh, worse than animals. All sorts of unpleasant words became cold whips, lashing the two naked, pathetic bodies in the room. Paula Jennings buried her face in her knees, her crying turning into a desperate wail. Frank Thompson struggled to get up from the floor, but all those stares and words pinned him to a pillar of ignominy, and I just stood there, far away, watching in silence. Very good. This scene is 100 times more magnificent than I had imagined. This is just the beginning, Frank. You'll never know how that huge funding gap was created, the one big enough to make your company collapse, the one you thought would make me come crawling to you. You'll also never know how gratifying it was to walk step by step along the edge of the cliff I had carefully prepared, all while I was by your side, playing the part of the devoted, ignorant wife. Today's scene is just the appetizer. It's the interest. Turning my head slightly, I whispered to my mother, who was trembling with anger beside me, yet couldn't hide a look of satisfaction, as if I were commenting on the weather. "Mom, the air in here is bad. Let's go." After speaking, without watching the climax of this obscene drama I had orchestrated, I turned around elegantly. Behind me echoed Frank Thompson's collapsing roar, Paula Jennings's heart-wrenching sobs, and the effervescent discussion and curses of my relatives. My movement as I turned was very slow, like slow motion in a movie, as if I wanted to burn every scene of that hell behind me into my mind. Frank's howl, Paula's cry, the murmur of the relatives' discussions, and their undisguised looks of contempt became the best soundtrack for this play. I didn't leave immediately. I gently took the arm of my mother, who was pale and trembling. Her hand was ice-cold and still shaking slightly. "Mom." My voice was light as a feather but conveyed a strange calm. "The atmosphere here is heavy. Let's go out for some air." My mother's lips trembled. She looked at me, then at the wide-open door, like the mouth of a monster. Inside was the obscenity of her son-in-law and her niece, naked and entangled. In her eyes were tears and rage, but greater still was the desolation and helplessness wrapped in overwhelming shame. In the end, she couldn't say anything, just leaned heavily on my arm for support. We passed through the narrow path the crowd spontaneously opened. Looks of pity, compassion, curiosity, and a subtle satisfaction pricked my back like needles, but I kept my back straight. My face was expressionless, only a cruel serenity enveloped me. Valerie, my second aunt, approached to say something. She moved her lips, but in the end, she just sighed and patted my shoulder. I nodded slightly in response. My steps didn't falter for a moment. Just as I was about to turn the corner of the hallway, leaving the center of the chaos, my eyes caught the figure of Frank Thompson, finally dragging himself up from the floor. He clumsily covered his lower body with a suit jacket, from who knows where. His face was disfigured by extreme shame and collapse, and his bloodshot eyes stared in my direction with murderous intent. In them was a sky-piercing hatred, mixed with incredulous terror. He tried to lunge at me, but was held back by my cousins, who still had their wits about them. He struggled like a caged beast, screaming my name. "Valerie Carter! It was you! You planned this, you venomous snake!" Venomous snake. I stopped my steps slightly, slowly turned my head, and gave him a very faint, cold look. In that look, there was no anger or sadness, only a cold, unfathomably deep pool that reflected all his misery and ugliness. He seemed to freeze at that look. His struggling stopped for an instant. I said nothing, just looked at him. Until the madness in the depths of his eyes was replaced by a deeper fear of the unknown. I turned my head again, supporting my mother, and disappeared completely from his sight. Behind me, his more collapsed roar and suppressed sobs, along with Paula Jennings's increasingly hysterical crying, mixed with the bustling warnings and reproaches of the relatives, creating a grotesque symphony. I didn't go back to the event hall. I took my mother directly to the quiet cafe on the hotel's ground floor. We sat in a corner and ordered hot black tea. My mother sat across from me, holding the warm cup with both hands. Finally, tears fell in thick drops. How could this happen? Frank and Paula, that girl, how could they? My mother couldn't continue, choked with emotion. I didn't comfort her, just silently offered her a tissue. "I always thought there was something off about Paula," my mother lamented. The way she looked at Frank was strange. But how? How could he do something like this, on a day like today, in front of so many relatives? She clutched her chest in anguish. "Valerie, my child, you've suffered so much." "Mom." I took my mother's cold hand. My voice was very steady. "I'm fine. Really, I'm fine." The moment I heard those sounds in the lounge and saw that necklace, something died completely inside me. Now, all I have left is cold, ice-like reason and a burning resolve. "How can you be fine?" She looked at me with teary eyes. 8 years. You've been married for 8 years. How could Frank do this? It was because it was 8 years. I pursed my lips slightly. There was no warmth in that smile. He must have thought that no matter what he did, I would endure it and let it pass. That for the sake of this family, for so-called honor, I would cover for him and fix it for him. My mother looked at me, stunned, as if she were seeing her daughter properly for the first time. Valerie, you. Mom, I interrupted her, looking at her with calm eyes. This matter is not going to end like this. Just then, my phone began to vibrate frantically. My dad's name and the names of several uncles flashed alternately on the screen. I immediately silenced it and placed it face down on the table. It must be your father, my mother said worriedly. Let them handle the situation up there first, I said serenely. If I go now, what else will I do but listen to their tearful apologies or see a cornered and desperate Frank Thompson? It's not necessary. I don't want to hear any noise right now. Soft music played in the cafe, a world away from the chaos upstairs. I drank my tea slowly. The burning sensation in my stomach gradually subsided, replaced by something cold and hard as ice, like well-tempered steel. About 30 minutes later, my father's calls finally stopped. Instead, I received a call from Richard Miles, my personal attorney. I took the call and stepped out onto the cafe's terrace. Valerie Carter. Attorney Miles's voice was as cold and professional as ever. I've heard a summary of the story. Should I head there now? Not yet, I said, looking at the city's neon lights in the distance. Attorney Miles, those documents I asked you to prepare. You can start now. There was a brief silence on the other end of the phone. Then the reply. Understood. I will immediately proceed to organize the share trust agreement for Mr. Frank Thompson's company, the guarantee documents for the various loans you provided him through the offshore company, and the ownership verification of all real estate properties in his name. I can have them ready first thing tomorrow morning if needed. Good, I paused, then added, and please continue to monitor the situation at Tech Solutions Incorporated. Be alert to any anomalies in the flow of funds. Inform me immediately of any small movement. Understood. Hanging up the phone. The night wind, with the coolness of early autumn, caressed my face. I inhaled deeply. The cold flame in my chest burned more vigorously. Tech Solutions Incorporated, the business Frank Thompson valued as his own life, the source of all his pride and arrogance. He probably never imagined that I, the one he called the wife who only handled household chores, had pierced through layers of fog, discerning the numerous hidden holes behind his company's prosperity, and had quietly tied a beautiful, yet fatal, bow on his most important funding source. He would imagine even less that the loss of honor he suffered today was merely the first step in collecting my interest. When I returned to my seat, my mother's emotions seemed to have calmed a bit, but there was deep worry on her face. Valerie, what are you going to do now? Are you going to divorce him? Divorce? Of course, I replied without hesitation. But not now. My mother looked at me, uncomprehending. Mom, divorce is simple, but what I want is not just that piece of paper. My fingers drummed lightly on the table, a rhythmic sound. I'm going to make that man, Frank Thompson, vomit up everything he has taken from me and our family over all these years. I will make him lose his honor and lose everything. My mother inhaled sharply. She seemed shocked by the venom in my words. Valerie, isn't that too cruel? Cruel? I smiled faintly. Mom, do you know what he said to Paula Jennings outside that lounge? When she finds out the company is going under, she'll come crawling to me. Then I can do whatever I want. I repeated his words, my tone serene. My mother's face turned ashen instantly. She clenched her fists. That beast. How dare he think that way? So, Mom, I looked at her, my gaze piercing. Being merciful to the enemy is being cruel to oneself. If he was already plotting against me, treating me like a fool and using me as a stepping stone, I have no reason to think of marital affection. My mother remained silent for a long time. Finally, as if she had made a decision, she nodded firmly. All right, your mother supports you. We can't let that ingrate get away with it. At that moment, there was a commotion at the cafe entrance. My father, his face grim, surrounded by relatives with various expressions, was heading towards us. Behind him was Paula Jennings, clothes disheveled, hair messy, tears and handprints on her face, and Frank Thompson, pale and eyes empty, practically being dragged by two cousins. Ah, the interrogation party arrives. I sat firmly, not even getting up. My mother reflexively tried to stand, but my hand gently stopped her. My father's procession approached our table with pomp. "Valerie Carter!" My father's voice mixed suppressed rage and exhaustion. He shot a severe look at the dog-beaten Frank Thompson, then directed his piercing gaze at me. "What on earth are you trying to do? Will you only be satisfied when you've shattered the entire family's honor, making us the laughingstock of the city?" There it was, the classic victim blaming. I slowly raised my head and met my father's angry gaze. "Dad, you're asking the wrong person. Weren't it your son-in-law and your niece who shattered the family's honor?" My gaze flickered over to Frank and Paula. Upon meeting my eyes, one hastily lowered his head, and the other shrank behind someone else as if burned. "You!" My father was choked by my words, his face hardening. "Even if they were wrong, you can't do this. Bringing so many relatives to watch. How are your mother and I supposed to face our friends after this?" "So," I interrupted him softly, "for the honor of you and Mom, I should have pretended not to see, not to hear, and continued playing the role of the devoted, foolish wife who was being deceived? And wait for my husband and his mistress to continue their affair in our house, in my bed, and even wait for his company to go bankrupt so I could pay his debts and then beg him?" My words became cold knives that stripped away all hypocrisy. A murmur of consternation broke out among the nearby relatives. "Cousin! Cousin!" Paula Jennings suddenly knelt with a thud, crying her eyes out, trying to grab my skirt. "I was wrong. I really was wrong. I must have lost my mind for a moment. I've wronged you terribly. Please, forgive me just this once. Please." I watched her performance expressionlessly, even leaning back to avoid her touch. "Forgive you? And then what? Wait for the next time you lose your mind?" Paula's crying stopped abruptly, her face drained of color. "Valerie Carter!" Frank Thompson raised his head fiercely, his once deep and loving eyes now bloodshot and filled with the resentment and madness of a cornered man. "You planned this, didn't you? You knew all along. You brought them all here on purpose. You venomous snake." I looked at him and finally smiled. It was the first expression that could be called a genuine smile since this all began, but that smile was ice cold. "Mr. Thompson?" I opened my mouth slowly, each word a spike of ice driven into his face. "If you two had been innocent, what good would it have done for me to call everyone over?" He was speechless for a moment, as if he had been choked. "You dirty the board because you can't control your own zipper, and then you blame the spectators?" I leaned forward slightly, my gaze like a surgical scalpel, precisely dissecting his last shred of disguise and dignity. "Did you not think of the consequences when you were cheating on me? Did you not think I would find out when you put my necklace on that woman? Did you not think someone might hear when you were sleeping with my cousin right in the next room, at our family gathering?" The consecutive rhetorical questions pierced his heart one by one. Frank Thompson's face went from white to blue to purple. He struggled fiercely, trying to lunge at me, but was held firmly by my cousins. "Let me go! Valerie Carter, I'll kill you!" "Kill me?" I raised an eyebrow slightly, my tone even containing a hint of curiosity. "And then what? Will you go to the afterlife to accompany me, along with your young lover? Or will you completely bury your teetering Tech Solutions Incorporated with me?" The words Tech Solutions Incorporated fell like a thunderbolt on Frank Thompson's head. All his madness and struggling stopped in an instant. He opened his eyes wide, staring at me, his gaze filled with extreme shock and terror. "What? What are you saying?" His voice was dry and broken, trembling with disbelief. Seeing the fear of the unknown finally surface in the depths of his eyes, I leaned back in my chair with satisfaction. I lifted the now cold black tea and blew on it lightly. "What am I saying? I think you know it well in your heart, don't you?" I took a sip of my tea and raised my head. My gaze swept over all the relatives with their different expressions and finally settled back on Frank Thompson's colorless face. I said, word by word with clarity, "Mr. Thompson, the game has just begun. The debt you owe me, to our Carter family, I will collect it myself, cent by cent. You'd better prepare yourself well." The instant my words fell, the entire cafe was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Only the ragged, terrified breathing of Frank Thompson and the suppressed, desperate sobs of Paula Jennings echoed, mixed, announcing the end of an era and the official beginning of the era of Valerie Carter. The neon outside the window continued to shine, splendidly adorning this night, and that cold flame in my heart was already spreading like a wildfire. The neon outside the window shone brightly, illuminating the ashen pallor that had completely vanished from Frank Thompson's face like a ghost. His pupils were constricted, and a strong wave of shock, desolation, and finally the terror of falling into a bottomless abyss churned within them. He opened his mouth, but only a gasping sound came out of his throat, unable to form a word. "What? Game?" He finally forced out those two words. His voice was shattered. I no longer looked at him. My calm gaze turned to my ashen-faced father and the silent relatives with varied expressions around me. "Dad, Mom, the air here is bad. Let's go home." I stood up and took my mother's still trembling arm. My attitude was relaxed, as if I had just witnessed a bad play and was not the person who had just directly shattered an 8-year marriage and 2 lives. My father moved his lips, looked at me once, then at Frank Thompson's ashen face. Finally, he let out a deep sigh and waved his hand. It was a signal allowing us to leave. He no longer looked at Frank Thompson. In that look, besides anger, there was a coldness mixed with the betrayal and shame of having been deceived. The 3 of us left the cafe under numerous complex gazes, with the strange smell of dishonor and black tea. Behind me came Paula Jennings's finally uncontrolled sobs and Frank Thompson's low, desperate moan like a wounded beast. I knew that from this moment on, I and Frank Thompson, and even everyone involved in this matter, had taken a path of no return. Returning to the apartment I had bought before I was married and kept afterward, my mother's emotions completely collapsed. She hugged me and cried bitterly, repeatedly cursing Frank Thompson as an ingrate, worse than a beast, and caressing my face, asked if I had known for a long time, if I had been enduring it for a long time. I patted her back to comfort her. I neither confirmed nor denied. Certain dirty details only bring more pain in knowing. It was enough for my mother to know that her daughter had not completely collapsed and had sufficient ability and determination to get everything back. My father sat on the living room sofa, smoking one cigarette after another. In the thick smoke, his face looked grim. After a long time, he opened his mouth with a hoarse voice. "Valerie, what's this about Tech Solutions Incorporated you mentioned earlier?" I poured him a glass of water and sat across from him. My tone was calm. "Dad, Mr. Thompson's company has been in serious financial trouble since last year. Previously, under the pretext of joint investment and production expansion, he borrowed a considerable amount of money from me and, through me, from you and several uncles, right?" My father paused for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, there was something of that. He said the project prospects were very good and the profitability high. He also said there were guarantees. The guarantees were several apartments in his name that, in fact, were already mortgaged for the 2nd and 3rd time to the bank, and shares of Tech Solutions Incorporated, which looked shiny but were actually inflated in value due to several major decision-making errors and the leakage of key technology." I interrupted my father. My tone didn't waver a bit. "The guarantor on the loan agreement he provided, you must have been Tech Solutions Incorporated. Itself, a company soon to have all its blood and flesh sucked out, leaving only the shell." My father's face hardened instantly. The hand holding the water glass trembled slightly. That bastard dared to deceive us like this? Not only did he deceive, but he did so without any remorse. I twisted my mouth slightly. He even thought that if he just persuaded me well, he could use our Carter family's contacts and funds to continue receiving transfusions, overcome the crisis, and even ascend to a higher level. And when the time came, he would probably have discarded me like an old shoe, because in his eyes, I was just an old wife. Damn him! My father slammed the table furiously. The water glass clinked loudly. His chest rose and fell violently. He couldn't contain his rage. Dad, calm down, I soothed him. Let me handle this. My father looked at me. There was a mixture of complex emotions in his eyes, concern, deliberation, and a strange sense of as if he were sizing me up. Valerie, you. Since when? Since when did you prepare? I completed his sentence and smiled faintly. That smile carried a piercing coldness. Since the first time he tried to deceive me with fake accounting books. Since the first time he began to divert large sums of money, which should have been marital assets, to a shell company he personally controlled under the pretext of an investment. I stood up and walked to the window, looking at the bright city lights spreading out below my feet. For 8 years of marriage, I fulfilled my role as a wife, as a daughter-in-law, and even as a business partner. But I never forgot one thing: that I am Valerie Carter first. The trust and resources I gave him were not for him to raise his mistress, divert family assets, and in turn, plot against me. My voice was very low but contained an undeniable force. My father was silent. He looked at my back for a long time. Finally, he let out a long sigh. In that breath, there was relief mixed with some weariness. All right, if you need help from the family, just tell me anytime. I don't need it right now. I turned around. Dad and Mom, just make sure to control the family. Let no one be moved by the crying and pleading of Frank Thompson and his parents. I'll take care of the rest. That night, many people couldn't sleep. My phone was burning. Frank Thompson, his parents, his disreputable friends, and several distant relatives trying to mediate. I didn't answer any of them. I only replied to an email from attorney Richard Miles at dawn, saying that the preparation of the documents was complete and asked him to send the first legal notice in my name to Tech Solutions Incorporated and to Frank Thompson individually first thing in the morning. The content was the recovery of the large sum of funds that had been delivered in the form of a loan but had not actually been used in the promised investment project, and the demand for all related fund flow evidence. At the same time, I accessed an encrypted email that only I knew. Inside were several reports from an international credit agency detailing the evidence of how Frank Thompson had been diverting assets and manipulating accounting books through the complex private lending market and a network of shell companies for the past 2 years. There were also clear photos and videos of him and Paula Jennings meeting secretly at various hotels. The dates were long before I found the necklace. I reviewed the documents coldly, classifying the evidence and backing it up in several secure locations. My heart beat calmly. There was no anger or sadness, only the coldness of a hunter examining his prey caught in a trap. At dawn, I received the call I was expecting. It was Frank Thompson's mother, Deborah, my ex-mother-in-law. As soon as I answered, I heard her tearful but forced-to-be-composed voice. "Valerie, it's Mom. About last night. Frank was wrong. He wronged you terribly. I apologize on his behalf. It's his fault, 1,000 times his fault. But Valerie, you've been married for 8 years. Even if it's not love, there's affection for the sake of old times. Couldn't you give him a little leeway? That legal notice. The company is really in trouble." I listened silently, and when she finished, I opened my mouth slowly. My voice didn't waver a bit. "Ma'am, first, don't ever call me Mom again. I can't bear it. Second, the legal notice is just a procedure to recover property that isn't his, in accordance with the law. Finally, one makes their own path, another doesn't open it for them. He should have thought of today when he betrayed me, deceived me, and plotted. Valerie, how can you be so ruthless? Will you only be satisfied when you've ruined Frank?" Deborah's voice suddenly became sharp. "Ruthless?" I smiled slightly. "Compared to your son spending my money, embracing my cousin, and planning how to handle me after my bankruptcy, I think I'm quite merciful. And I'll tell you one more thing. That villa in your and Mr. Thompson's name, the source of most of the purchase funds, seems to have some problems. If necessary, I can provide more detailed evidence of the fund flow." A deathly silence fell on the other end of the phone. Only ragged, terrified breathing could be heard. I hung up immediately and blocked the number. The darkness before dawn is the deepest, but it is also a sign that morning is approaching. I knew the real war was just beginning. In the following days, an undercurrent flowed through the business world and my family. Attorney Richard Miles moved quickly. The legal notice was like a stone thrown into a calm lake, causing concentric ripples. The already fragile finances of Tech Solutions Incorporated were stretched to the limit. Due to this sudden demand for payment of a large debt, several suppliers and partners who were waiting to see what would happen began to move upon hearing the rumors. They urged to collect debts and ceased cooperation. Frank Thompson found himself cornered, mobilizing all his contacts to try to reconcile with me, even mentioning the old friendship between his parents and mine. But I refused to see him, and rejected all who tried to mediate, politely or directly. My parents also withstood the pressure and clearly positioned themselves on my side. Several family elders who initially thought my method was too radical fell silent when my father hinted that Frank Thompson had tried to divert the family's assets and informed them of the real situation of Tech Solutions Incorporated. They even began to investigate their own financial transactions with Frank Thompson and his company. In an instant, Frank Thompson became almost a street rat. Everyone turned their backs on him, but it still wasn't enough. A week later, I released a second piece of news through Attorney Miles. I formally requested the bank to exercise the right of pledge over some key patents of Tech Solutions Incorporated, in the name of the offshore company I controlled. These patents were the ones Frank Thompson had secretly mortgaged to obtain loans, and the real lender of those funds was me. This news was the last straw. The stock of Tech Solutions Incorporated plummeted. It hit the daily limit down for 3 consecutive days at the opening. Phone calls from the bank, demanding loan repayment, almost paralyzed the company's phone and Frank Thompson's personal mobile. He tried to find new investors, but due to the information that Attorney Miles intentionally leaked, all potential investors learned of the complex debt dispute and the imminent legal litigation behind Tech Solutions Incorporated. They all backed out. I sat in the spacious, bright study of my apartment, looking at the terrible green stock chart of Tech Solutions Incorporated on my computer screen, and took a sip of my coffee expressionlessly. The time was almost ripe. That afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Frank Thompson. His voice was hoarse and tired, with the baseness of a cornered man. "Valerie, can we talk?" He was almost begging. "All right," I replied without hesitation. "I choose the time and place." The place I chose was the cafe of an exclusive members-only club in the city center. It was a private and elegant space. This was a place he liked to take his clients to show off his success. I arrived before him and sat in a quiet corner by the window. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the huge windows, bathing me in a soft golden glow. I wore an impeccably tailored suit. My makeup was perfect and my expression serene. It contrasted sharply with the man who approached hurriedly, with a wrinkled shirt, unshaven face, and deep dark circles under his eyes. He sat across from me agitatedly. His gaze trembled with unease, unable to look at me directly. "Valerie." He opened his mouth with difficulty. His voice was dry. "Mr. Thompson, get to the point." "My time is valuable," I interrupted him. My tone was distant and formal. He was speechless for a moment. A trace of humiliation crossed his face but was soon covered by a deeper anxiety. "Valerie, I was wrong. I really was wrong. I must have lost my mind for a moment. I wronged you terribly. I'll accept any punishment you impose on me. But the company can't fall. It's my more than 10 years of effort and sweat. Please, save Tech Solutions Incorporated. And me just this once. If you just withdraw the lawsuit and stop pressing for those funds, I'll do anything. I can give you all my shares in the company. I'll end things completely with Paula. We can start over." Listening to his repentance and meaningless promises, intended only to protect himself, the last and slightest ripple in my heart completely calmed. Even in this state, he was still thinking only of his company, his effort and sweat. He could even say the ridiculous phrase of "start over." I gently stirred the coffee in my cup, lifted my head, and looked at him serenely. "Mr. Thompson, do you think I'm short on those shares of yours that will soon be worthless paper?" His face turned white. And whether you end things with Paula or not is your freedom. It has nothing to do with me," I continued. My tone was calm. "As for starting over, do you think a broken mirror can be put back together?" He opened his mouth but said nothing. Small drops of sweat formed on his forehead. "I didn't come here today to listen to your useless apologies and promises." I put down the coffee spoon. A clear, clinking sound echoed. "I came to notify you of two things." He fiercely raised his head and looked at me tensely. "First, regarding the divorce, my lawyer will contact you. In the division of marital assets, I will claim the part that is legally mine. Of course, it will mainly be the division of the assets that still retain value in your name. The debts of Tech Solutions Incorporated are your personal actions. They have nothing to do with me." He tried to rebut with trembling lips, but under my gaze, he couldn't utter a word. Second, I leaned forward slightly. I lowered my voice, but it had an undeniable penetration. "The funds you diverted abroad to those accounts, a total of about $9 million. I expect you to return them within 3 days. Otherwise, I won't mind submitting all the evidence of your money laundering, embezzlement of company assets, and tax evasion jointly to the Financial Crimes Unit and the IRS. Frank Thompson's pupils contracted sharply. The color completely drained from his face, and he stared at me as if he had seen a ghost. His body began to tremble uncontrollably. "You? How? How do you know?" "Impossible. That was the money you gradually diverted through the private lending market, taking advantage of loopholes in the company's system, the retreat path you prepared for yourself, right?" I completed his sentence and drew a cold smile on my mouth. "By chance, the main anonymous shareholder of that private lender you used is me." As if a lightning bolt had struck his head, Frank Thompson was completely petrified. His gaze went from shock to desolation and again to indescribable terror and collapse. He slumped limply into the velvet chair as if all his bones had been removed. With an ashen face, his lips moved, but no sound came out. He finally realized that from the moment he had bad intentions, he had already walked step by step into the net I had precisely woven. That all his manipulations he thought were secret, all his dirty calculations, had been under my surveillance. He was like a ridiculous mouse, struggling in vain under the claws of a cat, not knowing that his life and death were already controlled. Seeing his total collapse, I felt no satisfaction in my heart, only a cold, ice-like calm. I took the napkin from the side and elegantly wiped my mouth, as if I had just enjoyed a delicious snack. 3 days, Mr. Thompson." I stood up, looking down at him. My gaze was as if I were looking at a pile of worthless trash. "You only have 3 days." I finished speaking and, without looking again at his dazed shell, as if his soul had been extracted, I took my bag and turned around. The sun was still dazzling. It filtered through the glass dome of the club, illuminating the fine dust floating in the air. I left the club and got into the black sedan waiting on the street. The driver asked in a low voice, "Ma'am, where to?" I looked at the streetscape passing quickly by the window. Those familiar and strange faces were busy with their lives. "Take me to pick up Leo," I said softly. Finally, a genuinely tender mother's smile appeared on my face. My war was not yet completely over. There were still the division of assets, the divorce proceedings, and perhaps subsequent legal litigation. But the most important battle had been won. What I had recovered was not just money and dignity, it was the absolute control of Valerie Carter's life. The road ahead is still long, but I knew I would walk it very well. The car drove smoothly towards Leo's school. The scenery outside the window slid by under the afternoon sun. It was familiar, yet strange. I leaned back in the seat, my fingertips idly tracing the cool surface of the leather bag. Frank Thompson's ashen, completely collapsed face seemed to be vividly etched in my mind, but strangely, it provoked no emotion, only an ice-cold calm that it was all over. My phone vibrated once. It was an encrypted message from attorney Richard Miles. "Valerie, the target has been notified. The initial reaction is as expected. He is mentally broken, and monitoring of the foreign accounts shows login attempts." I replied with 2 words, "Keep watching. The efforts of a cornered man are just a catalyst that accelerates his fall." When I met Leo, he clung to me like a cheerful little bird, chattering about the fun things that had happened in kindergarten, completely unaware of the bloody battle being waged in the adult world. Seeing his pure, smiling face, the frozen ground of my heart finally cracked a little, and a warm heat welled up. This was why I had to win, and why I had to win thoroughly. "Mommy, where's Daddy? He hasn't come to pick me up much lately." Leo lifted his face and asked, a question in his big eyes. I crouched down and fixed his shirt collar. I made my voice unusually soft. "Daddy is very busy lately. He's gone on a business trip to a very faraway place for a while. From now on, Mommy, Grandma, and Grandpa will be with you, okay?" Leo nodded as if he understood, and didn't. Soon, his attention was caught by the toy train in a shop window down the street. That's the world of children. Sadness comes quickly and goes quickly. I would put all my strength into protecting this pure sky so that not a speck of Frank Thompson's filth would stain it. After dropping Leo off at my parents' house, I didn't stay. The storm had just begun. I couldn't let the fallout reach my parents. I returned to my apartment and calmly began to organize the evidentiary documents. Attorney Richard Miles also moved simultaneously. He formally filed the divorce petition and the application for property preservation with the court. At the same time, he submitted some preliminary evidence of Frank Thompson's embezzlement and misappropriation of funds anonymously to the relevant regulatory authorities. I knew Frank Thompson would never sit still. A cornered dog will leap over the wall. He would undoubtedly counterattack in the dirtiest way possible. As expected, the next morning, a dark current began to move on the internet. Several gossip forums and social media accounts with many followers began to spread slander about me almost simultaneously. The headlines were sensational. The cruel methods of a high society lady accusing her husband of insanity to steal his fortune. The promiscuous private life of a tycoon's wife, Valerie C. Evidence of extramarital affairs. The dark past of socialite Valerie C. The black history of success by immoral means exposed. The content was filled with hard-to-describe falsehoods, with some blurry stolen photos, presenting me as a wicked, dissolute woman who would stop at nothing for money. The comments section was filled with online trolls manipulating public opinion, trying to turn Frank Thompson and Paula Jennings into poor victims, a true love cruelly persecuted. Deborah, my ex-mother-in-law, even personally appeared in a phone interview with a third-rate media outlet. She pleaded tearfully about how immoral I was, how I neglected the family, and how I had pushed her son to the brink. At all times, she categorically denied her son's responsibility for the adultery and instead accused me of not fulfilling my duties as a wife. Seeing the malicious defamation and the lament that inverted black and white on the screen, I let out a hollow, incredulous laugh. This was, of course, the only thing they had left. Their intention was to sling mud at me to divert attention, gain compassion, and even pressure me with public opinion. But they had miscalculated. I did not react immediately. I didn't even send a warning letter through Attorney Miles. I just calmly captured and recorded everything. I saved every link of the accounts, spreading the rumors and the comments of the trolls, and ordered my assistant to track the IP addresses and identities of several of the most active accounts. I would let the bullets fly a little longer until their performance reached its climax and all the demons came to the surface. At the same time, I contacted several influential and trusted financial media outlets and investigative journalists with whom I had long collaborated. I didn't complain or defend myself. I simply provided them with some indirect evidence of the real financial situation of Tech Solutions Incorporated, the abnormal fund flow, and the massive diversion of assets by Frank Thompson personally, even during the company's crisis. Sometimes, the truth needs a stronger channel to break through the fog of lies. Once all the preparations were in place, I received an unexpected call. It was Paula Jennings's mother, my aunt. On the other end of the phone, her voice was mixed with crying and deep shame. "Valerie, what face do I have to call you? What Paula has done? That she committed such indecency. It's our fault for not raising her well. Your aunt apologizes to you. I also apologize to your mother." I remained silent. My heart did not soften easily. "But Valerie," my aunt's voice trembled with desperation. Paula just called me, crying her eyes out. Frank Thompson, that miserable man, has put all the blame on her. He's hit her, and even threatened her. He told her that if she doesn't come forward to put all the blame on you, he'll release the indecent photos. What does she have? My heart sank. Frank Thompson really had no limits. Paula knows she was wrong. She really knows it. Now she's so scared she wants to die. Valerie, I'm begging you. Please, for your aunt's sake, could you save her? As wrong as she is, she's your cousin. My aunt was sobbing loudly. Cousin. When she was writhing in pleasure under my husband, wearing my necklace at our family gathering, did she ever think that I was her cousin? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, suppressing the nausea and anger boiling inside me. I hated Paula Jennings, of course, but it wasn't a capital crime, and above all, she shouldn't be used and threatened by scum like Frank Thompson. Aunt, I opened my mouth. My voice was coldly ruthless. Send me Paula's address now, and tell her to stay there, lock the door, and not open it for anyone. I'll take care of the rest. I hung up the phone and immediately contacted Attorney Miles and a trusted private security agency. Some dirty matters must be handled by professionals. The noise on the internet peaked 2 days later. It seemed Frank Thompson's side had invested more trolls and resources. All sorts of defamatory posts flooded me, and even a so-called close source began to reveal that I was mentally unstable and violent. Deborah appeared in the media more frequently, acting with profound grief. Just as public opinion was about to tilt to one side, the wind I had been waiting for blew. Several authoritative financial media outlets were the first to open fire. A thorough investigation broke out, pointing to the serious financial fragility of Tech Solutions Incorporated and the immorality of the management. The article included anonymous information and evidence hinting at the misappropriation of funds by Frank Thompson. As it was an economic article from a trusted media outlet, the impact was enormous. Immediately after, online media with high credibility and independent investigative journalists launched a series of counterattack articles and videos. The content was not just to defend me but systematically refuted all the false accusations circulating on the internet based on clear evidence. They revealed the context and actual times of the blurry photos, made public some of my charitable donation records and my good reputation in the industry, and even released an edited audio file. In the file, Frank Thompson admitted to sleeping with Paula Jennings in a moment of anger during an argument and called me a hen that doesn't lay eggs. Although the recording did not directly mention property issues, his arrogant, shameless, and cold attitude was enough for any rational person to judge who was in the right. At the same time, Attorney Richard Miles sent, in my name, a formal and severe legal warning to all media and individuals spreading the rumors. He attached some already collected evidence of defamation, clearly stating that legal responsibility would be pursued. This series of fast and precise attacks hit the vital point. Public opinion on the internet instantly reversed. The rational voices that had been suppressed by the trolls began to be the majority. Numerous internet users were outraged at having been used, and instead began to delve into the pasts of Frank Thompson and Paula Jennings. The marketing accounts that had been active deleted their posts and apologized. The video of Deborah's lament was filled with mockery and curses. And what dealt the final blow to Frank Thompson was Paula Jennings's counterattack. Under the protection of security guards, and with her mental state somewhat stable, Paula Jennings provided a detailed written statement and some conversation screenshots. In them, she not only confirmed her affair with Frank Thompson, but, crucially, that Frank Thompson had repeatedly complained that I was controlling and hindered business development, and hinted at his plan to divert assets and divorce me once the company overcame the crisis. She also handed over the external hard drive with the indecent photos that Frank Thompson had used to threaten her. Although this statement could not be direct evidence of an economic crime, it branded Frank Thompson as scum and a fraudster in public opinion and in the divorce process. When a wall falls, everyone pushes it. Several small shareholders and partners who had previously been deceived by his honor or his lies also began to denounce him. The IRS and the Financial Crimes Unit formally launched an investigation into Tech Solutions Incorporated, and Frank Thompson individually. Frank Thompson was finished. His company declared bankruptcy, liquidation, and his assets were frozen and seized. All his personal assets were also included in the scope of enforcement. Banks, suppliers, and former investors filed lawsuits to collect debts. He tried to contact me but couldn't reach me, and even came to wait for me below my apartment, but was ruthlessly evicted by security. He had a scruffy beard, deep dark circles, and a haggard appearance, with no trace of his former arrogance. He even knelt publicly outside the apartment lobby once, crying and begging for forgiveness, becoming the laughingstock of passers-by. I sat in the upstairs study, coldly watching his shame through the CCTV screen. There was no emotion in my heart. Crocodile tears are worthless. The divorce judgment proceeded with surprising smoothness. Faced with ironclad evidence, Frank Thompson almost gave up defending himself. The court finally granted the divorce, and custody of Leo naturally fell to me. Given Frank Thompson's serious faults and state of indebtedness, I was awarded the absolute majority of the marital assets in the division, and he had to pay high child support and compensation for moral damages, although I knew it was unlikely he would pay that money. On the day of the sentencing, Frank Thompson did not appear in court. I heard he was under a travel ban for economic crime charges and could be formally arrested by the police at any time. Leaving the courthouse, the sunlight was a bit dazzling. Attorney Richard Miles said softly beside me, "Valerie, it's basically all over." I nodded, looking at the blue sky in the distance, and exhaled deeply. The coldness and shadow that had been suppressed in my chest for a long time seemed to dissipate a little under this sun. Attorney Miles, continue to supervise the debt recovery and cooperation with the relevant agencies. As you command. I got in the car and received a text message from an unknown number. It was a very short sentence. "Cousin, I'm sorry, and thank you. I'm leaving, Paula." I looked at the message, was silent for a moment, and then deleted it. Each person must pay the price for their choices. She chose the wrong path and paid the price of her youth and her honor. I chose to fight back and protected what I considered most important. There is no forgiveness between us. Everything has simply been settled. The car started and joined the traffic. My phone rang again. It was my mother. Her voice had a joy I hadn't heard in a long time. "Valerie, the judgment is out. That's great. Bring Leo over for dinner tonight. I've made your favorite soup." "Yes," I replied, a sincere and warm smile finally spreading across my lips. The smoke of war slowly dispersed. There might be ruins left, but it had also left me a new and clean space where I could draw my own future. The road ahead is still long. Maybe there will be more storms, but I knew that with a sharp knife in hand and armor on, I would no longer fear any challenge. I am Valerie Carter, reborn from the fire. The road ahead will be a success.